They said she was cursed. They called her Barren. For 20 years, she endured the whispers, the mockery, the abuse. But when the truth finally emerged, it shattered everything they thought they knew, and the man who destroyed her life would pay a price far greater than he could have ever imagined. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the modest two-bedroom apartment, followed by a woman's muffled sobs. Sandra pressed her trembling hands against her mouth, trying to contain the cries that threatened to escape. She had learned, over the years, that silence was her only defense. Any sound, any protest, would only fuel Moses's rage. "Look at you." Moses's voice thundered through the living room, his face contorted with contempt as he towered over his wife. 20 years, Sandra. 20 years of nothing. Do you know what people say about me? Do you have any idea what it's like to be the laughingstock of the entire neighborhood? Sandra's body shook as she knelt on the floor, picking up the shattered pieces of what had once been their wedding photo frame. The glass cut into her fingers, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. Blood mixed with tears as she looked up at the man she had once loved with every fiber of her being. "Please, Moses," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Please, just give me more time. The doctors said there's still hope. We can try the new treatment they mentioned." "Hope?" Moses laughed bitterly, the sound devoid of any warmth. "I've been hoping for 20 years. My youngest brother got married just last year, and his wife gave birth last week." "Last week, Sandra." "They've been married 1 year, and they already have a child. Meanwhile, I'm stuck with you, a woman whose womb is as empty as her promises." Each word was a dagger to Sandra's already wounded heart. She had heard variations of this speech countless times before, but it never got easier. If anything, it grew more painful with each repetition, like a wound that was constantly reopened before it could heal. "I've been patient," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've prayed, I've fasted, I've done everything the doctors and the spiritual leaders suggested. I want a child just as much as you do, Moses. Maybe even more." "Patient?" Moses scoffed, kicking one of the chairs across the room. "How much more patience do you expect from me? I'm 45 years old, Sandra. 45. All my friends have children, some even have grandchildren. And what do I have? A barren wife who can't even fulfill the most basic duty of a woman." Sandra flinched at his words, each one landing like a physical blow. She had heard the term barren so many times that it had become synonymous with her identity. The neighbors whispered it when she passed by. Moses's mother hissed it with venom every time she visited. Even the women at church looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, as if infertility were a contagious disease or, worse, a divine punishment. But the cruelest irony was that Sandra herself didn't know whether she was truly the problem. Moses had always refused to get tested, insisting that there was nothing wrong with him. "I'm a man," he would declare with misplaced pride. "Men don't have problems like that. It's always the woman." The abuse had started subtly, years ago, a harsh word here, a cold shoulder there. But as the years passed without a pregnancy, Moses's behavior had deteriorated into something monstrous. The verbal attacks became daily occurrences. He would compare her to other women, taunt her with stories of his friends' growing families, and blame her for his own unhappiness. His friends only made matters worse. They would gather at their local bar, drinking and commiserating about their marriages, and inevitably, the conversation would turn to Moses's childless state. "Man, you need to make a decision," his friend Thomas would say, slapping him on the back. 20 years is long enough. Cut your losses and find a woman who can actually give you children. "My cousin divorced his wife after just 5 years of trying," another friend, Peter, would add. "Now he's remarried with 3 kids. Best decision he ever made." These conversations planted seeds of resentment that grew into full-blown hatred. Moses began to see Sandra not as his partner, not as the woman who had stood by him through poverty and hardship, but as an obstacle to his happiness, a defective product that needed to be discarded and replaced. His mother, Esther, was perhaps the worst influence of all. A domineering woman who had never approved of Sandra from the beginning, she seized upon the lack of children as vindication of her initial objections to the marriage. "I told you she was wrong for you," Esther would say during her frequent visits, her voice dripping with malice. "I could see it in her eyes from the first day." Barren. "Cursed. My son, you need to let her go before she drags you down with her. There are plenty of good, fertile women out there who would be honored to bear your children." Sandra, an orphan who had lost her parents in a car accident when she was just 15, had no family to defend her, no one to offer her refuge or support. She had married Moses when she was 23, full of hope and dreams for their future together. He had seemed kind then, considerate, a man who looked past her lack of family and loved her for who she was. But that man had disappeared, replaced by a bitter, angry stranger who looked at her with disgust. The breaking point came on a humid Tuesday evening. Moses returned home earlier than usual, his face flushed with alcohol and his eyes blazing with a dangerous intensity. Sandra, who had been preparing dinner, felt her stomach drop when she saw his expression. "Pack your things," he said, his voice cold and final. Sandra's hand stilled over the pot she had been stirring. "What? You heard me. Pack your things and get out. I want you gone by morning." "Moses, please," she began, but he cut her off with a violent gesture. "Don't please me. I've made my decision. This charade has gone on long enough. My mother has found me a proper wife, a young woman named Amanda. She's 25, a virgin, from a good family. Everything you're not." The words hit Sandra like a physical assault. She stumbled backward, gripping the counter for support. "You can't be serious." "Moses, we took vows." "Vows?" He laughed harshly. "What good are vows when you can't even give me a child? You failed, Sandra. Failed as a wife, failed as a woman. And I'm done waiting for a miracle that's never going to happen." That night, Sandra begged, pleaded, and cried, but Moses remained unmoved. He had already made up his mind, already envisioned his new life with Amanda, already convinced himself that divorce was his only path to happiness. The next morning, Sandra found herself standing on the street with a single suitcase containing her meager belongings. Moses had thrown her out with such carelessness that the neighbors stood watching from their windows, some shaking their heads in sympathy, others nodding in approval, believing she had gotten what she deserved. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, Sandra walked the streets of the city, each step heavier than the last. She had no money saved, Moses had controlled all their finances. She had no family to call upon. She was completely, utterly alone. For 3 days, she slept on park benches and in bus stations, surviving on the kindness of strangers who occasionally offered her food or a few coins. She had never felt more humiliated, more worthless, more abandoned by both God and humanity. Meanwhile, Moses wasted no time in moving forward with his plans. Within 2 months, he had divorced Sandra and married Amanda, a shy, soft-spoken young woman who had been groomed by Moses' mother for this very purpose. The wedding was a lavish affair, attended by all of Moses' friends and family, who congratulated him on finally making the right decision. "Now you'll have children," Esther said, beaming with satisfaction as she watched her son dance with his new bride. Amanda comes from a fertile family. Her mother had 7 children. "This is the beginning of your real life, my son." Moses allowed himself to believe it. He convinced himself that Sandra had been the problem all along, that with Amanda, everything would be different. He imagined the children they would have, the family gatherings, the grandchildren that would eventually come. Finally, he would silence the whispers and the mockery. But as the months passed, Something unexpected happened, or rather, didn't happen. Amanda didn't get pregnant. The first few months, Moses dismissed it as normal. It takes time, he told himself and anyone who asked. We are still newlyweds. But after 6 months, then 9, then a year, the familiar anxiety began to creep back in. The doctors assured him that Amanda was perfectly healthy, her reproductive system functioning normally. They suggested he get tested, but once again, Moses's pride prevented him from even considering that he might be the issue. There's nothing wrong with me, he would insist, his voice rising with defensive anger. The problem is never the man. Maybe Amanda isn't as healthy as everyone thought. But deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form. Sandra's life, meanwhile, had taken an unexpected turn. After weeks of homelessness and desperation, she had finally found work as a cleaner at a small office building. The job didn't pay much, but it was enough to rent a tiny room and buy basic necessities. She worked tirelessly, taking on extra shifts whenever possible, slowly rebuilding her life one day at a time. It was at this job that she met Francis, the building's security supervisor. Francis was a gentle, soft-spoken man in his late 40s, a widower who had lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier. He had 2 grown children from his first marriage, both of whom were now independent and living their own lives. At first, their relationship was purely professional, polite greetings and brief conversations during shift changes. But Francis noticed the sadness in Sandra's eyes, the way she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. He began bringing her coffee during her breaks, asking about her day, listening when she needed to talk. You don't have to tell me, he said one evening as they sat together in the building's lobby after hours, but I can see you've been through something terrible. Whatever it is, I want you to know that you're not alone. The kindness in his voice broke through Sandra's carefully constructed walls. For the first time since Moses had thrown her out, she found herself telling her story, the 20 years of marriage, the abuse, the constant accusations, the humiliation of being called barren, and finally, the divorce and abandonment. Francis listened without judgment, his eyes filled with compassion and anger at what she had endured. No one deserves that, he said firmly. No one. You are not barren, Sandra. You are not a failure. You are a survivor, and you are worth so much more than that man ever recognized. His words were a balm to Sandra's wounded soul. Slowly, carefully, a friendship developed between them. Francis never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never made demands or imposed expectations. He simply offered her what Moses never had, genuine companionship, respect, and unwavering support. After 6 months of friendship, Francis asked Sandra to dinner at a proper restaurant. Not as colleagues, he clarified, his expression nervous but hopeful. As something more, if you're willing. Sandra had hesitated. The wounds from her marriage were still raw, the fear of being hurt again almost paralyzing. But something in Francis's steady gaze, in the gentle way he had cared for her over the past months, made her want to take the risk. Their courtship was slow and tender, nothing like the whirlwind romance she had experienced with Moses. Francis introduced her to his children, who welcomed her warmly, having seen how happy she made their father. He took her to meet his extended family, who embraced her without judgment or questions about her past. When Francis proposed, 1 year after they had first met, Sandra cried, but this time, they were tears of joy, not pain. Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling. What if I can't give you children? Your family might want. Stop, Francis interrupted gently, taking her hands in his. Sandra, I'm not marrying you for children. I already have children, and they are grown. I'm marrying you because you make me happy, because you're kind and strong and beautiful, and because I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Whatever happens, happens. We'll face it together. They married in a simple ceremony attended by Francis's family and a few close friends Sandra had made at work. It was the opposite of Moses's lavish second wedding, but it was filled with genuine love and warmth. And then, the miracle happened. 3 months after their wedding, Sandra began feeling nauseous and exhausted. At first, she dismissed it as stress or perhaps a stomach bug. But when the symptoms persisted, Francis insisted she see a doctor. The news left them both stunned. Sandra was pregnant. Not just pregnant, she was carrying triplets. Sandra couldn't believe it. After 20 years of trying, 20 years of being called barren and cursed, 20 years of being told she was the problem, she was finally going to be a mother. Not to one child, but to 3. The pregnancy was challenging, requiring bed rest and careful monitoring, but Francis was by her side every step of the way. He held her hand through morning sickness, rubbed her feet when they swelled, talked to the babies growing in her womb, and assured her constantly that she was doing amazingly. When Sandra finally gave birth to 3 healthy babies, 2 boys and a girl, she wept with joy and relief. As she held her children for the first time, looking into their tiny faces, she felt a sense of completion she had never known before. These were her babies, her miracles, proof that she had never been the problem at all. "Thank you," she whispered to Francis, who stood beside the hospital bed with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself." "No," he said, kissing her forehead gently. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at happiness. Thank you for these beautiful children. Thank you for being you." Back in Moses's life, things had taken a drastically different turn. 3 years had now passed since his marriage to Amanda, and there was still no child. The optimism and confidence he had felt on his wedding day had long since evaporated, replaced by a familiar sense of frustration and despair. But this time, he couldn't blame his wife. Amanda had been tested repeatedly, and every doctor confirmed the same thing: she was perfectly healthy and capable of conceiving. The problem, they increasingly suggested, might lie with Moses himself. "You need to get tested," Amanda would plead, her voice gentle but firm. "Please, Moses. We can't move forward until we know what we're dealing with." But Moses's pride remained his greatest weakness. "I don't need to be tested," he would snap, his anger barely contained. "I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Maybe you're stressed. Maybe you need to relax more, eat better, pray harder." The same friends who had encouraged him to divorce Sandra now looked at him with barely concealed pity. The mockery he had hoped to escape had returned tenfold. Thomas, his supposed best friend, had even made a cruel joke at a recent gathering: "Maybe the problem was never Sandra. Maybe it was you all along." The comment had sparked a fight, with Moses punching Thomas and being thrown out of the bar. But the seed of doubt had been planted, growing in the dark corners of his mind where pride couldn't quite reach. Moses became increasingly depressed and withdrawn. He would sit for hours in silence, staring at nothing, consumed by thoughts he couldn't quite articulate. Amanda tried to be supportive, but she was struggling with her own disappointment and the growing realization that she might have made a terrible mistake. Esther, Moses's mother, was no help. She had begun making subtle comments about Amanda's failure to conceive, conveniently forgetting that she had been the one to arrange the marriage in the first place. The pressure she applied only deepened the tension in the household. It was during one of Moses's darkest moments that fate dealt its final, crushing blow. He had gone to the mall on a Saturday afternoon, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of his home. He wandered aimlessly through the stores, not really looking at anything, just moving through space like a ghost. And then he saw her. Sandra. She was standing near the children's clothing section, laughing at something a man beside her had said. But it wasn't just any man, it was her husband, Francis, whom Moses didn't recognize. And around them, in a stroller and being carried, were 3 babies, no more than a year old. Moses felt his world tilt on its axis. He stood frozen, unable to move or breathe, As he watched Sandra, his supposedly barren ex-wife, cooing at the 3 children, her face radiant with a happiness he had never seen during their marriage. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But as he watched, paralyzed by shock, Sandra bent down to adjust one of the baby's blankets, and Moses saw the unmistakable evidence of motherhood in every gesture, every loving glance. Before he could stop himself, Moses found his feet carrying him toward her. Sandra. She looked up, and Moses saw the exact moment recognition hit her. The joy drained from her face, replaced by weariness and something else. Was it fear? Moses, she said carefully, straightening up. Francis immediately moved closer to her, protective and alert. Those babies, Moses stammered, pointing at the stroller with a trembling hand. Whose are they? Sandra's expression hardened. They are mine. These are my children. The words hit Moses like a freight train. Your children. But, how? You couldn't. I couldn't what, Moses? Sandra's voice was cold now, all traces of the submissive woman he had known gone. I couldn't have children. Is that what you were going to say? Isn't that what you told me every day for 20 years? That I was barren. Cursed. Useless. Francis stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Sandra's shoulders. I think you need to leave, he said firmly. You've said enough to my wife to last a lifetime. Your wife? Moses' voice cracked. She's your wife now? Yes, Sandra said, lifting her chin. Francis is my husband, and these are our children. Triplets. Born 10 months after we got married. The implication hung in the air between them like a guillotine blade. Moses felt his legs weaken, his mind struggling to process what this meant. That's not possible, he whispered. You were barren. The doctors said. The doctors never said I was barren, Moses, Sandra interrupted, her voice sharp. You just assumed. You refused to get tested yourself because your pride was more important than the truth. You blamed me for something that was never my fault. And you destroyed our marriage because you were too much of a coward to face reality. Moses opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stood there, gaping like a fish, as Sandra gathered her children and turned to leave. Sandra, wait, he finally managed to say. She paused and looked back at him one last time. Goodbye, Moses. I hope you find what you're looking for. But you won't find it with me. That chapter of my life is closed forever. And with that, she walked away, Francis beside her, pushing the stroller with their 3 precious children, living, breathing proof of Moses' greatest mistake. That night, Moses couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to Amanda, who slept fitfully beside him, and stared at the ceiling as his mind replayed the scene at the mall over and over again. Sandra had children. 3 children. After 20 years of nothing with him, she had married someone else and immediately gotten pregnant with triplets. The mathematical impossibility of coincidence stared him in the face, mocking him. There was only one logical explanation, one truth he had spent years, decades, refusing to acknowledge. It wasn't Sandra. It had never been Sandra. It was him. At 3 in the morning, Moses found himself in the bathroom, hunched over the sink, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The face that looked back at him was that of a stranger, aged, bitter, defeated. He thought about all the years he had wasted, all the cruel words he had spoken, all the pain he had inflicted on an innocent woman who had loved him despite everything. He thought about how he had thrown Sandra out onto the street with nothing, how he had humiliated her in front of their entire community, how he had blamed her for his own failures. And he thought about Amanda, lying in the next room, suffering through the same accusations and pressure that Sandra had endured, all because Moses still refused to face the truth. As the sun rose, Moses made a decision. He called a private clinic, one where he wouldn't be recognized, and made an appointment for that afternoon. Amanda was visiting her parents, so he wouldn't have to explain where he was going. The test results took 3 days to process. When Moses returned to the clinic to receive them, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the envelope the doctor handed him. "Mr. Moses," the doctor said gently, his expression sympathetic, "I'm afraid the results confirm what we suspected. You have a condition called non-obstructive azoospermia. In simple terms, your body produces very little to no viable sperm. The condition is likely genetic and has probably been present since birth." Moses felt the room spin around him. "But, can it be treated?" "In some cases, yes. There are advanced procedures that might help, though they are expensive and success is not guaranteed. With proper treatment, there's perhaps a 20 to 30% chance of eventually producing enough viable sperm for conception through assisted reproduction methods." 20 to 30%. After denying the problem for over 20 years. "Is there any chance," Moses asked, his voice barely a whisper, "that I could have fathered a child naturally? Without treatment?" The doctor hesitated. "Based on your results, it would be extremely unlikely. Near impossible, in fact. If you've been trying to conceive naturally for any length of time without success, this condition is almost certainly the reason why." Moses left the clinic in a daze. He sat in his car for an hour, unable to move, as the weight of his actions crashed down upon him. Sandra had been innocent. Completely, utterly innocent. And he had destroyed her life because he was too proud, too stubborn, too afraid to admit that he might be the one with the problem. He had called her Barren. He had mocked her, abused her, humiliated her. He had thrown her out like garbage and immediately married another woman, convinced that the problem would magically disappear with a new partner. And all along, Sandra had been perfect. She had been capable of having children. She just couldn't have them with him. The realization broke something fundamental inside Moses. He drove home in a fog, parked the car, and walked into his house like a zombie. Amanda was there, preparing dinner, and she looked up with concern when she saw his expression. "Moses. Are you all right? You look terrible." He couldn't meet her eyes. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice hollow. "I got tested. The results came back today." He watched Amanda's face as understanding dawned. First confusion, then realization, then something that looked like relief mixed with anger. "You're infertile," she said. It wasn't a question. Moses nodded, unable to speak. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "I just found out. Today. But I should have known years ago. I should have been tested with Sandra. I should have." His voice broke. "I destroyed her life for nothing. I blamed her for something that was my fault all along." Amanda was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her words were cold and measured. "You let me go through the same thing. You blamed me too. You made me doubt myself, made me think there was something wrong with me, when you knew, you must have suspected, that you were the problem." "I'm sorry," Moses whispered, but the words were meaningless and they both knew it. "Sorry doesn't fix this," Amanda said. "Sorry doesn't give me back the years I've wasted. Sorry doesn't." She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. "I need to think. I need time." But Moses barely heard her. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Sandra. He needed to find her, needed to apologize, needed to make things right somehow. The guilt was eating him alive, a physical pain in his chest that made it hard to breathe. Over the next few weeks, Moses became obsessed with locating Sandra. He asked neighbors, contacted old acquaintances, searched social media. Finally, through a mutual friend, he discovered where she lived, a modest but comfortable house in a different neighborhood. He drove there one evening, his heart pounding, rehearsing what he would say. He would beg for forgiveness. He would explain about the test results. He would tell her how sorry he was, how he had been wrong about everything. Maybe, just maybe, she would forgive him. Maybe she would understand that he had been a fool, blinded by pride and societal pressure. Maybe they could even. He pushed that thought away. He was still married to Amanda, even if their marriage was falling apart. But he needed Sandra to know the truth. He needed her forgiveness more than he needed his next breath. When he arrived at the house, he saw through the window a scene of domestic bliss that made his chest tighten painfully. Sandra was sitting on the floor, playing with her 3 children while Francis watched from the couch, smiling. The laughter and joy that filled that room was everything Moses had ever wanted, everything he had thrown away. He knocked on the door. Francis answered, his expression immediately hardening when he recognized Moses. "What do you want?" Francis demanded, blocking the doorway with his body. "I need to speak with Sandra," Moses said. "Please. It's important. She doesn't want to see you. Please. I found out the truth. I got tested. I know now that I was the problem, not her. I just need to apologize." Francis's expression didn't soften. "You want to apologize? After 20 years of abuse? After throwing her out on the street? After humiliating her in front of everyone? You want to say sorry and think that makes it okay?" "No, I just..." "Sandra." Francis called back into the house. "Moses is here." Sandra appeared behind her husband, and Moses saw the fear flash across her face when she saw him. That look cut him deeper than any words could. "What do you want, Moses?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he blurted out. "Sandra, I'm so sorry. I got tested, and you were right, it was me all along. I was the one who couldn't have children. You were never barren. You were never the problem. I was wrong about everything, and I destroyed your life because I was too proud to admit it." Sandra stared at him for a long moment. "And you think that makes it better? You think an apology fixes 20 years of abuse?" "No, but..." "But what, Moses? What do you want from me? Forgiveness? Absolution? Or do you want me to come back to you, now that you've realized your precious new wife can't give you children either?" Moses flinched. She had seen right through him to the desperate hope he had barely admitted to himself. "You can't have me back," Sandra continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm married now. I have a husband who loves and respects me. I have children, beautiful, healthy children that I never could have had with you. I have a life, Moses. A good life. And you have no place in it." "But I made a mistake," Moses protested. "I know that now. If I had just gotten tested back then, we could have gotten treatment, we could have." "No," Sandra interrupted firmly. "Even if you had discovered the truth back then, even if we had pursued treatment, it wouldn't have fixed the real problem. You didn't just make a mistake, Moses. You were cruel. You were abusive. You blamed me for something that wasn't my fault because you were too insecure to consider that you might be imperfect. That's not a mistake, that's a character flaw. And I'm not interested in revisiting that chapter of my life. Please," Moses begged, tears streaming down his face now. "Please, Sandra. I'll do anything. I'll make it right. There's nothing you can do," she said, and there was finality in her voice. "I forgive you, Moses. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry hatred in my heart anymore. I forgive you so that I can move on completely. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm giving you another chance. Forgiveness doesn't mean you get to be part of my life again. It just means I'm letting go of the pain you caused me. But goodbye, Moses. Don't come back here." And with that, Sandra closed the door, leaving Moses standing on the doorstep, alone and devastated. But Moses couldn't let go. The rejection had ignited something dark and desperate inside him. He began driving past Sandra's house regularly, watching from his car as she lived her happy life with Francis and the children. The children he had convinced himself should have been his. His obsession grew. He started following Sandra when she went to the grocery store, to the park with the children, to doctor's appointments. He told himself he just wanted to be near them, to see what he had lost, but the truth was darker than that. Moses had begun to believe that if he could just be part of Sandra's life again, even in a small way, everything would be okay. He imagined scenarios where Francis died or left, and Sandra would need him again. He fantasized about being involved with the triplets, perhaps as an uncle or family friend. The delusion grew until Moses could no longer distinguish between fantasy and reality. One Tuesday afternoon, Sandra had taken the children to the park near her house. Francis was at work, and Sandra was enjoying a rare moment of peace, watching her two sons play on the swings while her daughter napped in the stroller beside her. Moses had been watching from his car, parked across the street. When he saw that Sandra was alone with the children, something inside him snapped. He approached the playground slowly, his heart pounding. One of the boys, the smaller of the two, had wandered away from the swings toward the parking lot, curious about a bird he had spotted. Moses saw his opportunity. Moving quickly, before Sandra could notice, he scooped up the child and began walking briskly toward his car. "Excuse me," a voice called out. "Hey. What are you doing?" Moses turned to see a jogger, a woman in her 30s, staring at him with alarm. "This is my nephew," Moses said quickly, his voice unconvincing even to his own ears. "His mother asked me to." "That's not your child." Sandra's scream cut through the park. She was running toward them, her face a mask of terror. "Someone help. He's taking my son." Everything happened very quickly after that. The jogger grabbed Moses' arm, preventing him from getting into his car. Other people in the park rushed over, forming a circle around him. Sandra reached them and snatched her crying son from Moses' arms, holding the child tightly against her chest. "What are you doing?" she shouted at Moses, her voice raw with fear and fury. "What were you trying to do?" "I just wanted to talk to you," Moses said, but even he could hear how pathetic it sounded. "I thought if I had one of the children, you would have to see me, you would have to. You were trying to kidnap my son." Sandra's voice rose to a shriek. "Someone call the police. Now." Multiple people were already on their phones. Within minutes, police cars arrived, their sirens wailing. Officers separated Moses from the crowd, placing him in handcuffs while Sandra gave her statement, still clutching her son, who was crying hysterically. "This is my ex-husband," Sandra explained to the officers, her voice shaking. "He's been harassing me, following me. He came to my house a few weeks ago, and I told him to stay away. Today he tried to take my child. I don't know what he was planning to do." Moses tried to explain, tried to make the officers understand that he hadn't meant any harm, that he just wanted to talk to Sandra, that those children should have been his. But with each word, he only made things worse. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses had seen Moses grab the child and attempt to carry him away. Sandra had a restraining order filed against him within hours of the incident. The charges were serious: attempted kidnapping, stalking, and violation of a restraining order he hadn't even known existed until that moment. Moses' lawyer was blunt during their first meeting at the jail. "You're in serious trouble," he said. "Multiple witnesses, clear intent, a pattern of harassment. Best case scenario, you're looking at 5 years in prison. Worst case, it could be 10 or more." "But I didn't hurt anyone," Moses protested. "I just wanted to talk to her." "You tried to take her child," the lawyer said flatly. "That's not just wanting to talk. That's a serious crime. The prosecutor is pushing hard on this because of the stalking pattern and because you violated the restraining order. Amanda visited him once in jail. Her face was a careful blank as she sat across from him in the visitor's room. "I'm filing for divorce," she said without preamble. "And I'm asking for an annulment based on fraud. You knew you were infertile and you married me anyway without disclosing it." Moses could only nod. He had nothing left to say in his defense. "I feel sorry for you," Amanda continued. "You had a chance at happiness with Sandra, and you destroyed it. Then you had a chance at a fresh start with me, and you destroyed that too. Now you've destroyed your own life completely. I hope, somehow, you figure out how to live with what you've done." She stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I do believe you when you say you didn't mean to hurt anyone. But good intentions don't undo bad actions. You made your choices, Moses. Now you have to live with the consequences." The trial was brief. Moses's lawyer had advised him to